Okay, good afternoon to the first panel of the day. My name is Angel Harutyunyan, and I've been tasked to introduce the panel. Our first speaker will be Carlos Gomez Camarena. He maintains a psychoanalytical practice in Mexico City. Carlos is a full-time professor and researcher at the Communication Department, Universidad Iberoamericana in Mexico City. He's also a member of the forums of the Lacanian field in Mexico. He holds a PhD in psychoanalysis and psychopathology in Université Sorbonne Paris-Cité, and his research interests are anti-philosophy, contemporary French philosophy, and the clinical and theoretical uses of mathematics and poetry in Lacanian psychoanalysis. He was part of the translator teamwork of Barbara Cassin's Dictionary of Untranslatables, and is also coordinator in Mexico of the international project Extimacies, critical theory from the Global South. And today he's going to talk about the topology of Kantian and Frankfurtian critical philosophy and Lacanian anti-philosophy. And our second speaker, I'll introduce Samo as well. Though Samo, I guess, needs less introduction. It's not his first visit to Beirut. Samo holds a PhD. Samo Tomšić holds a PhD from the University of Ljubljana, Slovenia, and is currently visiting professor at the Academy of Fine Arts in Nuremberg. He's also a research fellow at Humboldt University in Berlin. His research areas comprise structuralism, psychoanalysis, epistemology, and continental philosophy. Recent publications include The Capitalist Unconscious, Marx and Lacan, and The Labor of Enjoyment, which came out last year and about which we will speak tonight at 7 p.m. in Barzakh, which is a cafe in Hamra. So you can follow the program and the maps, directions, wherever they are. Yeah, welcome.
Thank you.
First of all, I want to acknowledge AUB and Anti-Monogram for making really this possible. And second of all, I want to make a rectification of the title. At the beginning, I was thinking on how to conceive awakening in a Benjaminian way and to distinguish that from a Lacanian perspective, but I just can do like to trace the history of awakening in Lacan and pull all the consequences from political consequences of that. So the rectification of the title is Unattainable Awakening from Critical Theory, or for a possible awakening from critical theory. But what is the interest in the term awakening? This is part of the late Lacan part of this is a part of the so-called late Lacan book, because there's in the mid-60s Lacan was opposing a pair of terms. The first term, it was the triumph and failure, the triumph of religion and the failure of my teaching, or the failure of psychoanalysis. And there's a statement from Lacan who says, if religion triumphs, psychoanalysis has failed. But failure in Lacanian psychoanalysis has its own weight. It's a kind of success, but I'm not going in that direction. But in the mid-60s was this opposition between triumph and failure that he never get rid of. But at the same time, in the mid-60s, Lacan was introduced a new pair of oppositions, and this pair is, of course, awakening and sleepness. But why does this come from? Why does this pair is introduced by Lacan? As we have seen yesterday in Mladen's seminar, the project of Lacan was the continuation of enlightenment. But instead of the pair enlightenment obscurantism, which is a visual metaphor, by the way, we will choose a visual and conscious one. It's not only a matter of visual thing like enlightenment, obscurantism, or light metaphor, but also a conscious one. That is to say, awakening and sleepiness are states of mind, or states or different grades of consciousness. And this is related to the state of mind, consciousness, and this inverts the acts of this pair, namely dreaming, awakening. This talk is, of course, a continuation of I have developed in a series of questions regarding the tense relationship between psychoanalysis and critical theory that I spoke in Cairo, specifically between anti-philosophical approach to critical theory, or what I call at that time the 6 Lacanian anti-philosophical points concerning critical theory. In this conference, I have sketched out what I found the six most important irreducible points between philosophy and psychoanalysis, and why they are relevant for a possible renewal of critical theory. So that's where my questions come from. This list has not limited to these 6 topics, but it was a way to start and systematize a research program for extimacies. Some of these points are redundant, or they are related to each other, and some of them are compatible, and they are already both in philosophy and critical theory. The fact that some of these points are irreducible, almost in mathematical terms, does not mean that Lacanian psychoanalysis is superior to philosophy or vice versa. What proposed in that occasion was an anti-philosophical reading of critical theory. To explain this relationship between psychoanalysis and philosophy, it is crucial to understand them in terms of tension, irreducibility, and problematic knots. All of these last terms are expressed in topological terms. As I mentioned that day, it is an error, an epistemological obstacle to formulate this link as a conjunction, opposition, influence, overlapping, or concentric circles. I summarize these points in this way. I'm not going to develop them, but just to summarize, to give context of my question, the question that I will develop today. The first one is a new subject and correlative inherent element, the symptom. It's the divided subject and the symptom. This should be problematizing critical theory and psychoanalysis. The second one is the structural alienation, an original repression due to language. The third one is the modern status of knowledge, what Mellon called yesterday the division between power and reason in modern times, savoir connaissance, or in French, truth knowledge, or the unstable conception of a structure, which the first consequences is la langue, is the language as the accumulation of errors. It's the flip side of the structural conception of language. Fourth is the mathematical reading of Lacan. Real in Lacan is formulated merely as the impasse of formalization. This is part of the background of the epistemological turn in the first part of the 20th century. It's what I call the epistemological turn in France. It's Cavalier, Coiré. They say this is a new epistemological way of conceive things. It's, if you want to formulate something interesting in philosophy, you should do that in mathematical terms, because mathematics could conceive something that is unconceivable in other ways. Yesterday in Mladen's seminar, in the first and the second session, I was thinking all these discussions could be formulated in mathematical way, like set theory, topology, logics, the -1, the void, the failure. So this is the power of mathematical reading of Lacan. Of course, this full formulation, it's a kind of writing materialism. It is not the same thing to talk about language in discursive way than in writing way, and this is all the thing, this has all the weight in this writing materialism in mathematics. And of course, yesterday the question of reification of negativity that you raised, Ray, it could be put it in mathematical way. You also you brought Badiou, and not only Badiou, but a mathematical formulation of subtraction. And subtraction is a way to avoid this this reification of negativity. So this is why, in this 4 point, the mathematical reading of Lacan show us the relevance of topological term extimacies, or extimacy, which is not a metaphor. It's structurally speaking a formulation of a structure. I think you should explain more of that today.
Let's see about that.
Okay, so the fifth point is the logical displacement between the axis of possible and necessary to the impossible contingent axis, which is what Althusser call aleatory materialism. And the sixth and last point is the importance of the order of the semblance. Psychoanalysis, as Lacan said in La Chose Freudienne, is the science of mirages. It is a materialist theory of fictions as founded by Jeremy Bentham, which is another consequence of this flip side of the structural way of conceiving language, or la lang. Not la land, but la lang. And then I'm going to start my strictly speaking, my conference. For Freud, awakening. What's the importance of awakening? What's the novelty from Freud regarding awakening? Normally, awakening and reality. Okay, dreams and reality are the two opposition. It's an opposition. And to be awake is to be realistic, for example. But for Freud, what is the novelty from Freud? Is that awakening has not an external cause. And this is a very important point, because it is of course linked with the term of extimacy. The question that raised Freud was why in some cases dreams lead to an awakening, because in a way dreams are the guardians of being asleep. But why some dreams, namely nightmares, cause somebody to awake? This is the enigma for Freud. And his answer, okay, the problematic point was not only the symptomatic points are three. Of course, nightmares, of course, repetition of traumatic dreams, of neurosis of war, and the masochistic tendencies of ego. Those were the clinical problems for Freud, that dislocate this pair of reality and dreams. So Freud dislocated this pair of reality dreams because dream, it's the guardian of sleep, but at the same time, it's the paradoxical point of nightmares, traumatic dreams of neurosis of war and masochistic tendencies, and this leads Freud to a new theory of anxiety. Freud's view on anxiety shifted as he developed in his theory of repression, which describes how the ideas connected to sexual urges are repelled from consciousness when they come into conflict with civilized social norms. In other words, Freud claimed that the process of becoming social beings requires us to give up some sexual impulses. What is repressed comes back as anxiety. But in the late 1920s, Freud introduced a new theory of anxiety, abandoning his early view of anxiety as transformed libido. And this is related to this enigma, this paradoxical way of why some dreams awake us. He made an important distinction between a primary automatic anxiety triggered by traumatic situation in which helpless ego is overwhelmed, and signal anxiety, which can be activated in the ego response to the situations of danger as kind of warning, and warning and awakeness are etymology related. A danger as a kind of warning that a traumatic situation is imminent. Ultimately, these traits are manifestations of a more fundamental trait, the trait of castration. This perspective led Freud to reverse his former position, whereas before he had posited anxiety as a result of repression, he now understood it as preceding repression in giving rise to it. Instead of being a kind of side effect repression, it was now possible to think of the very contours of mind itself, which its defenses and symptoms, as above all means avoids anxiety. I'll be back on this later on in Lacan. But Lacan took this legacy and he made another step further regarding awakening. I will quote one of the most important quotes from for my conference, which is founded in a conference that he gave when he founded the clinical unit in Vincennes, in the Centre Expérimental de Vincennes, which now is Paris 8. And this conference, it's called Peut-être à Vincennes, or maybe in Vincennes. It's maybe in Vincennes we could transmit psychoanalysis, but maybe. And when he talks about the four knowledges that could be taught in this clinical unit, and he talks about logics, he talks about topology, he talks about linguistics, but the fourth one is a very rare one, which is anti-philosophy. This is the second time that he pronounced this word. The third one it was apropos Althusser, and he defines anti-philosophy in this way. Anti-philosophy, which I call gladly the research of what the university discourse owes to the educative supposition. It is not the history of ideas, how sad, which it may be able to help. A patient compendium of stupidities will allow, I hope so, to put in perspective its indestructible root in its eternal dream. Then we have the first term, eternal dream. Of course, this is an implicit quotation from Kant, and he finished with this sentence: "Dream from which there is no awakening, but a particular one." There's no awakening from that eternal dream of philosophy, but a particular one. I will explain that later. So in Lacan, we have different movements regarding this pair of dream and awakening. First of all, dislocation of the pair dream reality with a new pair, sleepness and awakening. Awakening is related, of course, with repetition, but also introduce a register of the real instead of orientating the first pair, dreaming reality, through reality. To put it in Lacanian formulation, unconscious is the hypothesis that we are still dreaming when we are in reality. So it comes a problem. How can we distinguish between dream and reality? This is the twist. This is a response also, an anticipated response to this so-called postmodern turn. Everything is from its simulation. There's no way to distinguish reality from fantasy and these kind of things. So if unconscious is the hypothesis that we're still dreaming when we are in reality, it is only the real, which is not reality, the real, the register of the real, that could make the difference between reality and dreaming. So real is the third term that dislocates this pair. The real is extimate of dream. This is another twist of the first Freudian gesture. The real is extimate of dream precisely in nightmares, but the real is also extimate to reality. In this sense, we have a new concept of ideology. Ideology as the effort to cover the real, not only in reality but also in dreams. The second way that Lacan develops this concept of awakening is that Lacan conceives a new statute of the symbolic, a new theory of the signifier. This change is threefold. One is symbolic register and signifier chain does not limit jouissance. The register of symbolic doesn't put a barrier to jouissance. On the contrary, is the cause of jouissance, and this has to do with the second point. Signifier process has a numb and sleepy effect, especially for clinicians. If psychoanalysis is an eternal process of decoding the unconscious, it has a sleepiness effect, numbness effect, or also dumbness effect. And third, we have a libidinal or political economy of the signifier. On one hand, there is a belly bottom of the dream, a limit of interpretation, an encounter of the real. On the other hand, in the very interruption of gap in the process of signification, we have the eruption of jouissance, homeostasis, pleasure principle, and stability are threatened. This is why Lacan turns into Marx, but also to James Joyce. In this point, ideology is fueled by the introduction of jouissance in the whole of the real. In this sense, jouissance is both impossible and unavoidable. If we articulate this last point with the first one, ideology is the mystification of the real either through dreams or reality, especially by fictions of stability, homeostasis, and harmony. This is a reformulation of what Lacan was developed in the 50s as a double aspect. On one side, we awake because of the trauma, which is at the end the encounter with the lack of the big other. We stumble upon the structural failure of the other, produces anxiety and falls into the subject, causing a split. On the other hand, this lack is concealed by the veil. This veil works as aletheia, as a procedure that conceals and shows the lack in the very same movement. But this last movement entails a libidinal economy of concealment. This is the difference between the Lacan of the 50s and Lacan of the early 70s. It's not only a matter of signifier, but it also has a political economy, a Marxist economy. This fantasy of truth is an attempt to recover what has been perceived as a loss. Here the term recover takes its full meaning on equivocity. The fantasy of truth takes the form of political economy of the plus de jouissance. Third, this is the third consequence or the third developed concept of awakening from Lacan. Numbness, sleepiness of the signifier chain is regarding to important it's important to underline this ideological byproduct of realistic approaches. If signifying chain, see, the signifying chain has an effect of numbness, sleepness, or even sleepness, sleepage of the signifier, it is important to underline this ideological byproduct of realistic approaches. What do I mean with this? At this moment, truth is elucidated through real and not by the notion of reality. Real is a whole, an immanent rupture in representation. Representation is the result of the intertwined dimensions of the imaginary and the symbolic. This time, ideology is sleepness of sleepage, or sleepness as dreaming, disorientation through the search of reality or truth. Of course, we have patients always claim that they are that we're saying it's truth, that they are neurotics in the basis of reality, you know. But this is a way of being not awake. It's to fall in the side of sleepness or dreaming. Let us not forget that we can lie through the very gesture of telling the truth. So being critical could be very conservative, cynical, or even a way to adapt us to neoliberal ethos. So this is a warning. This is a warning to critical theory, precisely because if critical theory doesn't account on the register of the real, if critical theory is only in the symbolic signifying chain, it could be part of the cynical approach to ideology. Fourth, for Lacan, there's a desire to sleep and desire to wake up. Now we introduce a new term, desire. We have to stress or underline desire to maintain the dimension of truth. Truth is on the side, it's not on the side of the register of the real, but truth is, in Lacan's term, is on the side of desire. At this point, I really want to bring some a chapter of the series of the Black Mirror series. This chapter that is called Nosedive. If you remember that chapter of Black Mirror, the main character, Lacey, which is it's interesting the name Lacey, has to wake up from this ideology of fueled by regain more prestige or more to be more recognized by people. But in order to awake, she has to choose between two bottles. One is a red bottle, and the other one is blue. Of course, this is a reference to the Matrix. But the interesting thing is that the red one, the one that awakes, his content is whiskey. And the blue one, which is the one that numbs you, that returns you to the dream of reality, is precisely coffee, which is very interesting. At the end, she got drunk, but in a way, she awakes from this prestigious reality. Okay. In this point, this desire to sleep or this desire to wake up, we have to take in account for Lacan the ferocity of the will to not know, the tenacious will of ignorance. Here, ideology is an active process of not to know. And the last one, there is a topological aspect of awakening. Of course, how do we orientate in the structure of the real? How do we orientate? How we distinguish, immanently speaking, not in a transcendental way, inside or outside, dreams from reality. What is the topology of the real? Or how we can localize the real in the immanent structure of the symbolic? This is a huge question. And this topological aspect of awakening is related to the Deleuze's concept of the fold and the Foucault self-reflection of power. There's no outside of ideology. And of course with Althusser, formulation of science as immanent torsion in ideology. Science is not different from ideology. It's an immanent torsion inside of ideology. Here, extimacy takes its full meaning. Extimacy is the superlative, of course, of exterior. It's not only a neologism, but it is also allowed in a grammatical way to say extimacy as a superlative of exterior. More exterior than exterior is extimacy. Awakening, then, is an unattainable process, or better, awakening as a fleeting or brief passage from one state to the other. What is important is the passage and not being in one state, or as Lacan put it, if philosophy is an eternal dream from which there is no awakening but a particular one, then ideology is not to be aware, this time ideology is to be aware of the numbness, dumbness, sleepness of the signifier, or the numbness of philosophy, and in the last instance, to be aware of this dumbness, numbness. In the last instance is the numbness and dumbness effects of critical theory. How much time do you have? Oh, I have just 5 minutes. So I have developed this concept of awakening, and I show you the different moves from Freud and from Lacan, but which are the consequences for critical theory on that? I already made some comments on that, but the first one is that the first consequence is that awakening is not it's not an state. It's just a blink. It's just a thunderbolt between two states, and there's a tension between truth and the real in Lacan psychoanalysis. This is the first consequence that we should be aware of. The second one is that theory, critical theory, is a practice. It's a practice that enables us to act, and this is the anti-philosophical side of psychoanalysis, because analytical act is related to discourse. For Lacan, discourse, the hard core of discourse is that they have consequences. To have consequences is exactly one way to formulate awakening. If you are awake, discourse has consequences. And the third consequence I was thinking about the global south and what can I say from Latin America about this? And the first formulation is that Latin America, of course, is extimate to Europe. Latin America is, in a way, the dream of, or the nightmare of Europe. In a way, Latin America is the future of Europe. We can see that what the United States made to Chile in the 70s is what Belgium, France, and Germany or Deutsche Bank is doing to Ireland, to Greece. So in this way, Latin America is the future of Europe. In this way, Latin America is the dream. It's not the American dream, but the Latin American dream of Europe. But also, in which way Latin America is the dream, is the Latin American dream of Europe? Because dream for Freud is the guardian of sleep. If you have noticed, if you go to Europe, they have, or to United States, if you see the TV, they have always this international news about what is happening in third world. And of course, it's corruption. This allows Europe or United States to sleep. This is happening in other countries, but not in our country, of course. But if you go Toronto's downtown or Berlin's downtown, you can find, of course, this extimate poverty already in their countries. But in a way, this Latin American dream allows United States and Europe to be asleep, you know. So international news are internal or extimate paradises as outsourcing of dreams in Europe and United States. And the last consequence that I was thinking of, I'm wondering if populism, in Laclau's term, and Jorge Alemán, one of the most important Lacanian psychoanalysts in Latin America, even if he lives in Madrid, his estimate between Buenos Aires and Madrid. I'm wondering if Laclau's appropriation of hegemony has awakening effects. This is a huge question because if you are aware of Laclau's appropriation of hegemony, it's made mainly by the signifying chain, and it's distinguished by mass psychology, which is mainly made of the symbolic and the imaginary register. Why hegemony and populism could be on the side of awakening? Why populism, in the way that Laclau conceives it, could have awakening political effects? Because hegemony or populism is a way to grasp or to articulate fundamental antagonism and intervene on it. Of course, I'm not talking about populism in terms of vulgar media terms. So these are the 4 points that I wanted to show you as a consequences of what I developed on this pair of awakening and dreaming. Thank you.
You have to move this. Thank you very much for having me here as part of the conference on extimity. I basically prepared more like a mapping, a text that's sort of mapping the issue within Lacan and kind of addresses also the philosophical challenges that can be associated with this. So it's more like a general framing for something that kind of is more and more becoming a sidekick project within this preoccupation with the problematic of instability in structuralism and extimacy is precisely bringing this instability to the point. So I would like to begin by placing the concept, or rather pseudo-concept, since it appears only once or twice, as Nadia has already reminded us in Lacan, next to another one which occurs more often, notably in the later phase of Lacan's teaching, even though we find it already in the text on the Portland letter, existence, written with a hyphen. This writing is adopted from Heidegger, who has been, at least in some regards, the strongest philosophical influence on Lacan's theoretical developments, which of course does not imply that Lacan has been a Heideggerian. But he definitely spotted the right problems in Heidegger being formulated in the wrong way, the question of technology being one of them. So I want to focus more on the prefix X that is shared by both terms, extimacy and existence, which is a very speculative prefix leading to the very core of psychoanalysis and its challenge for philosophy, epistemology, and politics. As the word suggests, extimacy or extimate stands for a specific type of intimacy which violates the dichotomy or opposition between interior and exterior. So it's sort of externalized intimacy. The phenomenon of extimacy has been often enough associated or exemplified through its link to anxiety. And what is indeed crucial here is that in extimacy, if we consider it in spatial terms, we are talking about an operation of unbordering, an activity, a spatial activity. And I'm thinking here of the term Entgrenzung in German, which doesn't appear in Freud, but which I find very useful for this entire Freudo-Lacanian framing. A destabilization of spatial order grounded on a clear-cut division between inside and outside. So the extimate, at least to some extent, translates the German unheimlich, and all the meanings that the word contains, so unhidden, undomestic, uncanny, whereby the prefix un or un indicates that something in the hidden, domestic, familiar, is opened up toward its opposite. That's why I'm kind of bringing this entire Entgrenzung, unbordering, into the picture. So unbordering suggests that instead of division, we have a continuum, abolition of border or of a limit without necessarily ending up in a completely, vast, infinite space, infinite universe, as Coiré would put it. So unbordering stands for an action which consists less in transgression of borders or a violation of the order of borders. This would still affirm the border as a fixed and consistent given, a reality, which needs to be transgressed. Where transgression sees a border to be overcome or violated, the operation of unbordering sees rather its unsharpening and disclosure. So extimity would be also a phenomenon of unsharpness. An example of unbordering, I think, would be the sexual position that Lacan describes as feminine, the position of non-all, which is also sort of a concept that can be associated both with extimacy and with existence and also with the action of unbordering. The position of non-all, which constitutes itself as an open set, as an internally split position, as difference. The masculine position, in turn, would be something that is constituted on the exception, eventually exception from the phallic function, as we know, and exception from the universality of castration, whereby this exception is precisely drawing a border and is brought down to the function of the border, which constitutes the register of all men. So a bordered, sharply drawn subjectivity. But let me make one step behind here. Lacan's inspiration for coining the neologism extimate is, among others, St. Augustine's description of God as my most intimate interiority. With this subversive formulation, St. Augustine suggests that God must be understood as inner otherness, as the big other in Lacan's sense. Augustine's position is subversive because it has several counterintuitive implications. First, that God does not stand for the ultimate transcendence, but for absolute immanence, which nevertheless remains an otherness. Second, that this absolute immanence is personal, my most intimate interiority, which means that God stands in direct continuum with the subject, is within the subject. Thirdly, and this is an implication that does not follow necessarily from St. Augustine, but is kind of imposed from the viewpoint of psychoanalysis, where the metaphysical dualism of body and soul makes no sense. So not only God is within the subject, but it is moreover immersed in the subject's body. It's a corporeal other, a foreign body within the subject's living body. And fourth, because of this immersion, which at the same time demonstrates the otherness of what is immersed, God is split. Or in Lacan's wording, God, the big other, does not exist. It does not exist in the full metaphysical sense of the term, as the highest of being, as the fullness of being, which is why its mode of existence is precisely an existence, an eccentric existence, but also a form of insistence that manifests as as a foreign body. So this may be the right moment to recall Lacan's enigma from Seminar 17, which goes as follows, quote, "What has a body and does not exist? Answer the big other," unquote. So linking back to St. Augustine, we could say that God is material, corporeal, and does not exist. It is in existence materialized. But so is the subject of the unconscious, which manifests itself only as a bodily disturbance, for instance, as an inhibition, as a symptom, as all the pathetic articulations that take place in the act of speaking and so on. The quoted enigma is emblematic for Lacan's later teaching, in which the link between materiality and inexistence or existence becomes central. Everything seems to be considered from its corporeal aspect, not only the subject and the big other, but also the small other, the unconscious, language, the real, and at the same time as inexistent. So this existence addresses an intermediate ontological register where the border between being and non-being makes no sense whatsoever, where hence an unbordering of being, if we want to stick to the philosophical opposition, takes place. And this unbordering is also indicated in the concept of non-all, which is less a negation of totality than its immanent dynamic and becoming, a totality in movement. Here would be, I guess, also the link between Lacan and Hegel. And we can exemplify the materialized inexistence of the big other in Lacan through his concept of la langue, which stands precisely for not only the accumulation of errors, as you said, and I completely agree with it, but also for the amount of corporeal effects or manifestations of language, for language understood as an organized disequilibrium which throws the body that inhabits language, as Heidegger would put it, out of joint and decentralizes it. The interaction between this body and language is homologous with what biology, for instance, addresses with its notion of milieu. Milieu, as we know, implies a decentralized and strictly relational conception of the living, which has been recently, for instance, described with the term extended organism, hence an unbordered body. The American biologist Scott Turner, who introduced the term, understands with this, above all, the relation between living organisms and their architectonic constructions, which in turn can be considered as processual structures or structures in becoming. Think of the ants and their constructions, or the bee, or whatever. Extension here stands for the dynamic spatial order between organisms and their milieu, in which the simple opposition between inside and outside is equally relativized. We are dealing with an active material space, one that Lacan addressed precisely in his considerations of topology and its peculiar materiality, like the physical materiality, but also the materiality that is kind of more of speculative character because it causes a certain resistance in thinking, inhibitions in understanding, and so on. So Lacan's engagement with the immersion of the living body in the symbolic order, or the symbolic milieu, if you like, follows the same spatial temporal nexus. Just like the organism of the living, the organization of the living is at the same time penetrated and differentiated from milieu, symbolic processes and operations, according to Lacan and other structuralists, expose an extension of the speaking being, so an extended subject. In order to make this step towards extension of the subject, the early modern notion of the subject had to be radically reworked and separated, notably from the Cartesian idea of a stable thinking substance and from conscious intentionality. This critical confrontation with the schoolbook Cartesianism also accompanies the biological relativization of the organism, which is why one could pursue a homology between the extension of the subject and the extension of the living in the first place. And Freud was, as you know, a pioneer here. It's no coincidence that we find in his work a repeated attempt to combine the psychoanalytical decentralization of thinking with the biological decentralization of life in his speculative biology, in texts like The Narcissism Writing or Beyond the Pleasure Principle. So there is something funnily relevant in Freud's most wild excursions to biology, to one-cellular, unicellular organisms that you also mentioned. So Descartes conceived the thinking subject as an inner whose action consists in the withdrawal from the world, in drawing a stable and certain border between thought and body. Cogito is neither extended nor susceptible to extension. Thought without qualities, which is to say thought without body. And what meditations, for instance, want to demonstrate is that the cognition of cogito is constituted through the progressive reduction of materiality, through the evacuation of thought out of the milieu, eventually out of its bodily milieu, and hence out of every external relation and untangling of thought and matter, which makes the entire milieu questionable, fading, unsharp, and uncertain. In the second step, this operation is repeated in thought itself, a thought experiment which seems to go all too well, as Lacan pointed out, since it brings Descartes to the experience of subjective destitution and of fading in the moment of doubt. But this fading, and this is where Lacan clearly parts ways with Descartes and his subversive potential for psychoanalysis, it's at the point that this fading is not recognized as pure action of thought, as thought in action. With his notion of the unconscious, Freud subverted the Cartesian scenario twice. Not only did he introduce a form of thought which challenged the centralized character of cogito and consciousness, as we usually hear, but he also introduced a notion of the unconscious which no longer described merely a hidden, intimate, or unclear interiority, but also and moreover an intimate exteriority. This is already indicated in Freud's word choice, the unconscious instead of the subconscious, which rejects the opposition of surface and depth and instead focuses entirely on the surface of thought, its anomalies, distortions, and disruptions. For this reason, the Freudian subject is essentially extension. The unconscious stands for decentralization of thought, but also for a thinking thing which must be understood as a body, a bodily cogito. Freud thus inverts the Cartesian deduction of cogito, not a delimitation or bordering from the body, not contraction of thought to a singular point without extension, also not extension of thought from a central point, but the emergence of thought in a material process of self-overcoming of the body, first and foremost in and through the activity of speaking. And with Marx, we could also add the activity of labor, which Lacan eventually did. So the unconscious is not as sharply separated from the bodily as the Cartesian cogito from extension, on the contrary, but it is nevertheless more than mere neurobiological process, as Freud also realized with the failure of his project of scientific psychology in 1895. Just like in Descartes, in Freud, too, thinking involves a break, not a break with matter, but a break in matter, or rather, a loop in matter. The phenomenon of hysterical conversion, bodily manifestation of a repressed and conflictual idea, thought or memory, brings the extension and the disharmonious character of thought to the point, so precisely its extimacy. The repressed idea and its bodily affect are one and the same. Hence, Lacan's claim in Seminar 17 that thought simply is affect, a bodily disequilibrium, a body in permanent state of disequilibrium. So the extension of thought in the context of language is not only metonymic spilling of the subject along the chain of signifiers. The signifier, this zero level of symbolic order, stands for the cut which brings about a symbolic body within the living body. For this reason, Lacan insisted that the signifier must be thought as material cause of bodily disequilibriums and also, above all, of the bodily split, and a thorough rejection of homeostatic conceptions of thought which have accompanied the history of philosophy. And basically, I mean, everything that I'm kind of trying to do in the research that evolves these reflections on space and activity and materiality is pretty much condensed in the following quote by Lacan from television. So Lacan says, "Man does not think with his soul as the philosopher imagined," so the philosopher being Aristotle. "He thinks as a consequence of the fact that a structure, that of language, the word implies it, a structure carves up his body, a structure that has nothing to do with anatomy. Witness the hysteric. This sharing happens to the soul through the obsessional symptom, a thought that burdens the soul that it doesn't know what to do with. Thought is in disharmony with the soul, and the Greek nous is the myth of thoughts accommodating itself to the soul, accommodating itself in conformity with the world. The world, Umwelt, so milieu, for which the soul is held responsible, whereas the world is merely the fantasy through which thought sustains itself, reality no doubt, but to be understood as a grimace of the real, end of quote. So accommodation would be here the key word, because it kind of implies the abolition of the extimate status of thought. So here is where the entire history of philosophy, from Aristotle to, let's say, philosophies of consciousness that's still predominant today, is basically it's basically thought or packed in this accommodation paradigm. So just like the metaphysical soul hypothesis or the psychological ego hypothesis, the subject of the unconscious too is a hypothesis, and Lacan said this on several repeated occasions. But the soul and the ego are hypotheses which are supposed to designate an assumed unity, synthesis and equilibrium of the mind-body nexus. Lacan, for instance, speaks of the soul as a sum of bodily functions that underpins biology from Aristotle to Jacob von Uexküll, so into the 20th century. The subject of the unconscious in turn points to the exact opposite direction. If the subject of the unconscious also describes a sum, then it is the sum of dysfunctions, again the organized disequilibrium, brought about by the functioning of the symbolic order in the living body. From Freud's perspective, the human subject emerges from the problematic juncture of the somatic with what Freud still calls the psychic, and what Lacan translated with the term symbolic. So to speak here of organized disequilibrium suggests that we are dealing with a structure, with an organization, which is characterized through imbalance and non-relation, hence the disequilibrium part. And the fact that Freud spoke of the return to homeostasis is in itself not necessarily a minus, since from contemporary biological research, homeostasis should be considered as a process rather than an ideal state that the bodily and the mental functions aspire to. So, just as a very uncertain footnote, could one not think of the conflict between Eros and the death drive as such a gradual homeostasis in which the balance and stability is constantly being negotiated but never fully actualized? This is really something that I'm sort of putting in the corner of uncertainty, but I would be interested in thinking about whether Freud's reflections on homeostasis can be somehow saved, and from this typical interpretation that, Freud is just aiming at the state without excitation. So, unlike the metaphysical soul or the Cartesian cogito, the subject of the unconscious is always already part of the milieu, extended and metonymized, marked not only by the bodily, by corporality, but by a specific redoubling of the body on the physiological, biological on the one hand, and the libidinal, symbolic on the other. The subject is thus constituted as outside itself between two differences, the symbolic difference that comes down to the difference between two signifiers, or the difference that is the signifier, and the real difference, which is a difference between the biological and the symbolic. And this difference traverses the body from within. What is at stake here are not two different bodies, so it's not a bodily dualism which would replace, displace, or reformulate the Cartesian dualism of cogito and extension, or the soul and the body, but a redoubling within one body, and therefore there's some sort of conflictual monism, or a position that is no longer purely monistic and not yet dualistic. So intermediate zone. And I think that Lacan moved in this direction progressively, especially in his later teaching, when he introduced the neologism par l'être, which brings together both accents, so the accent on speaking, on symbolic activity, on parole, and on the body. So that would be the part of être, the living being that re-emerges somehow in the Lacanian theoretical development. So to sum up, I would say the notions of existence and extimacy, and we can find also others, I guess, pointing to this direction, can be taken as Lacan's attempt to provide minimal foundations for a materialist ontology, which for sure subverts philosophy from within. But this means also that the notion of anti-philosophy, which is so often used for rejections of philosophy among psychoanalysts themselves, I'm looking at you, must be somewhat reinterpreted. Indeed, Lacan's later seminars contain an explicit attempt to reject a certain philosophy and mercilessly reject it. But they also contain an attempt in reinventing philosophy as a materialist orientation in thinking. And from this perspective, the term anti-philosophy would be the privileged marker of this reinvention. So, thanks. Sorry for this bit scattered. And I already, if I may, I already have a question for Carlos. You know, I mean, I'm sympathizing, but at the same time, I'm always very skeptical when very sharp cuts are being made in Lacan's teaching. I think Lacan was more building up and accumulating, you know, rather than cutting off and leaving behind.
Like Hegelian lips? Hegelian
we can talk about Hegelian leaps as well if you want, but you know, I would want to relativize a little bit this discontinuity and cuts, because I think this opposition of awakening and sleep, or eternal dream and particular awakening, and also and psychoanalysis, you know, triumph and failure, triumph and you also have the Tiché and automaton in seminar 11. Tiché being translated as encounter with the real.
Yes.
That's true. That I think kind of map onto each other. I think what is really changing in Lacan's teaching is more this clearing of the misunderstanding that the real is something substantial and something radically external, and you know, and a very sharply border delimited separate register, which would replace the notion of reality. So yeah, I was just thinking whether you see still a difference between Tiché and automaton and dream and awakening.
I didn't speak about Tiché and automaton because I didn't want it to explain more things from Lacan, but I agree with you. You can see the Borromean not movement since the logical time. This is the what I call numerosity. It's that there's a thinking, a numerical way of thinking in Lacan, and you can see that since the 1945. I totally agree with you. It was this clear distinction, or this break distinction between first Lacan, middle Lacan, and late Lacan. It's more a dialectical way of speaking. Yeah, and yes, yeah. And I have just a comment on of what you said and you asked me. Is that the so-called late Lacan has a remark on, he's not talking about idiocy or imbecility in terms of mental thing, but in terms of body. I'm thinking about maladroit. It's like it's being dumb. It's not a matter of mental thing, but it's a matter of the body.
Well, I mean, I think he's speaking about this, the signifier, not, like he's trying to de-psychologize stupidity.
Yes.
I mean, I also like this mental debility notion that he introduces.
But that's to justify why I was maladroit in my conference.
Quick question, yes, and then, thanks, Samuel. There's a lot to ask. I'm especially scared what to talk about biology, but it's just, it's just.
One can be afraid of biology.
I think there's the question is about, I don't know, maybe it's a quick move here, but you have, you clearly have more to say about this when maybe, is it too quick to kind of just, say that thought and affect are the same? I mean, there's, because, I don't remember now where Lacan describes this, but, this idea, when he talks about affect, he describes affect as functionaries without functions. And this is the crucial point of the whole distinction, so the work of repression. I don't know, there's something there that I'm still, they don't simply map out. Of course, the doubling is a way to go forth with this. Of course, there's kind of two bodies and one body somehow. I don't know if this is what you're, or the body that divides the body, the symbolic body, as you said, there's a kind of double of the body. But I'm there a bit, I don't know, I'm a bit hesitant. I don't know if you have something you want to say.
No, I'm also struggling with this redoubling. It's more about thinking it not as a fully constituted difference and interaction between these two different bodies, the linguistic and the organic, but more like Lacan says somewhere, these answers to philosophy students from 65, that the signifier is matter transcending itself in language. So this, I think it's really hitting something there in this activity of self-overcoming, and of course articulation into a system of difference and so on and so forth. But with the notion of Lalonde, he takes a step back into corporeality that wasn't there when he was talking about le langage, language, and just focusing on the emergence of the subject in the chain of signifiers and the metonymization of the subject's being and its fading and the thought logics of being and so on. I wouldn't say that Lacan later abolishes this, but he kind of brings, he unsharpens this clear opposition between the signifier and the body, just like he softens and eventually completely subverts the relation between the signifier and enjoyment. That's why this quote from Seminar 17, that thought is affect, or that thought is enjoyment, is, I think, articulated within this movement that slowly starts to think a different type of difference between the symbolic, libidinal, and corporeal, physiological, then a very sharp parallelism. I mean, I had to think about this during your talk, Alenka, when you were discussing the way the social mode of production or the economic organization of social relations is at the same time mobilizing a certain deadlock on the level of the subjective, and I think this deadlock is what Freud is framing when he says that the drive is basically a limit notion and a limit phenomenon that concerns precisely the problematic way the psychic is in juncture with the bodily.
Yeah, I mean, I could perhaps just take the cue here.
Yeah.
Thank you very much for both the papers. I have some questions for both of you. Yes, what you said is true, but at the same time, drive is not only the limit notion, but it's also a concept which is absolutely related to a limit, to a border, to a frontier.
Exactly.
It's not, I mean, there is, this is, for me, the question for you, and it's, it's intentionally kind of provocative, because I think one would need to make some further, perhaps, specifications. What you were talking about unbordering. What would be the difference between unbordering and globalization? Because globalization is a way which it looks like there is no exception, there is no exterior, I mean, at least in principle. And actually, Lacan he comes up with this notion of extimacy and of the problem, saying that this segregation is precisely a response to unbordering in a way. I mean, that there is, not to unbordering, but that there is a kind of something that happens here which is perhaps a little bit more complicated in the term that I don't think that necessarily a clear cut between two things is necessarily a bad thing. In the sense that you sharp distinctions, and then if they are more fluid, you are better off. So I think the whole concept of extimacy, to some extent, it is predicated on some rather sharp cuts, which are topologically then displaced into this other ontology that you mentioned. But I'm not sure that in itself it kind of simply is. I had a little bit of a problem with this notion of unbordering, and precisely this also, I mean, it's very complex, let's say. It's just a hint at what I think would perhaps be needed to be a little bit more specified. And for your talk, I also could not once say that there are two kinds of awakenings, first of all. Because there is this notion of Lacan that you mentioned, in which is a part of his discussion of the Freud's dream, I mean, the dream from that Freud discusses is Father, don't you see I'm burning? And the comment there is that we wake up in order to continue to dream.
Exactly.
So there is waking up, which is precisely there so that we can continue to dream. And then the other question, I mean, I don't have an answer, it's a vexing question, I think, for everybody here. Is this simple question, is it enough to wake up? What does it follow from that? Because if you say, as you did, there is only this fleeting moment between two states, in what case does it then even make a difference? What happened? I mean, it just, I know it's a difficult question, but what would be the singular awakening that would nevertheless reconfigure this, or whatever? I think you know what I'm saying. Basically, I don't have an answer myself, but it's really, is it enough to wake up, or what is it? What does it follow from, or are these consequences already part of some other state?
I perfectly agree that the drive is not only a limit notion, but a notion of limit. But and it's clear in Freud that this limit involves its own the dynamic of self-overcoming, which is also why I think it's very suitable to bring it together with Marx's description of capital as a drive of self-valorization where Marx also speaks about the logic of capital as setting borders and overcoming them, and that would be a part of, one aspect of globalization, of thinking of globalization in Marx, I guess. I also have to think of Hegel's quote from Logics. Nadia, you're using it in one text. Conversion of Grenzen into Schranken. I think this is what capital is doing. It's converting Grenzen into Schranken and leaves them behind. I'm not trying to address this with Entgrenzung. And this kind of logic of conversion of limits into barriers that are overcome, and the logic of segregation are pretty much one and the same thing. I mean, this is not in this in this sketch that I was presenting, but what I'm interested in doing with this Entgrenzung phenomenon is, on the one hand, linking it to this spatial dynamic that is in all the topological objects that Lacan is using, and on the other hand, on the notion of subjectivity as something that is constituted, at least in Marx's political framing, as a non-segregative function, in difference to, for instance, political liberalism or neoliberalism or whatever politics of identity we think of. These are all politics that operate with a very sharply drawn, delimited subjectivity, whereas in proletariat, for instance, one could see, that's what I would argue, an unbordered subjectivity. So a subjectivity that is unbordered precisely because it's detached from its psychological or identitarian or phenomenological aspect. So that would be that's the intuition in which I would go with unbordering. So again, more like the position of the non-all rather than this fictitious unbordering that is globalization.
But just to answer this question, what I try to do is just to sketch these 6 problems, these 6 points of problematization between philosophy and critical theory and psychoanalysis. In this way, I have this is what you just said. There are some Lacanian terms that are very productive, that they allow us to give a twist, a very different approach to critical theory or to philosophy. You say philosophy, and philosophy is a new way of doing philosophy. It's exactly that, but in a very different and radical way. You can find that in anti-philosophical thinking in Lacan. In this way, I was trying to sketch 6 points of tension, and just to give you an example on this pair of awakening and dreaming awakening. Okay? If I'm saying that in a way Lacan is a continuation of the Enlightenment project, what if we don't think in this pair of enlightenment, obscurity, but in terms of truth, failure? That gives us a very productive epistemology, a very productive new epistemology. And also with this pair of dream, awakening, but if we introduce a third term that decentrates the problem of truth truth and
Lie.
and lie. If you introduce the third term, real, you demonstrate this pair, and this allows us to think in another way, enlightenment and obscurity. This is my main point. So this is related with your question. I was thinking of this. Do you remember this book on aphorisms from Jean Baudrillard, America? The book called America. And there's an aphorism where Jean Baudrillard writes, there's a guy that the afternoon after the orgy whispers, no, in the middle of the orgy, he asks somebody, what are you doing after the orgy? And this is precisely the question. What are you doing? What are you going to do after the revolution? What are you doing to continue this awakening moment? Is it possible to be in this state of the real all the time? This is a huge question.
No, but this is not my question at all. It is how to transform this will into another better state.
Yes, yes.
Not how to remain awake in every day.
Yes, how to convert this awakening in a very productive, to have productive consequences. I have two answers for that, just two answers. The first one is repetition and novelty. In Badiou, this is a second approach, repetition and novelty. The second approach is, in Badiou you can find a crucial distinction between event, which is a product of repetition and novelty, and the construction of truth. And the construction of truth are how to pull out all the consequences out of the event. Of course, this is my response, but this is not really an answer, because every event, every novelty has its own way of how to pull out all of the consequences, or how to pull out all the consequences of being awake. This could be my response, but not my answer.
Did you have something? There's Vladimir. So yeah, Vladimir. Yeah.
I have a couple of comments. Thank you for both papers. First, on the question of awakening. Psychoanalysis is actually not about interpretation of dreams, it's about awakening. But what kind of awakening? I mean, I think it's the basic hanging line is we wake up in order to dream on. But there is a moment of awakening between two dreams. There's this moment, how to hold on to that moment. And I think, this is just an additional comment, I think it was very much in the spirit of the times, belonging to a certain historical constellation, that this thought of awakening came up. And particularly contemporary or counterpart to Freud I have in mind is Kafka. And I think that Kafka's work is all about awakening. You know, the first page of the trial, Joseph K. wakes up, and he wakes up in a sort of wrong reality. He's into reality which is not ontologically constituted. He can't quite wake up. But there is a waking up. There's the moment of waking up, and in Kafka's trial we have this wonderful formulation: waking up is the riskiest moment. If you survive this, then you'll be all right for the rest of the day. And actually, my book, University Press, has precisely this title, The Riskiest Moment. The Riskiest Moment. In the castle, the Lancer car comes to the inn at the foot of the castle, and he falls asleep on the bench, and then he is woken up, and then everything starts after waking up. In the Metamorphosis, well, the guy Gregor Samsa, he happens to wake up as a big insect. Ungeheure Ungeziefer. So again, you have the moment of waking up and dealing with the problem of waking up in Kafka. How to sustain this moment and what follows? What is there in this waking up? What kind of real emerges at the moment of waking up? It's not like you have a nightmare and you wake up, but you wake up and then you have a nightmare.
Yes, yes,
That is
that's
not-
true, that's true, that's true.
Okay, this is just...
And this is the task for critical theory,
Yeah, okay.
not only what.
Okay, this is a sort of brief comment on how your idea of waking up can be extended. And a very brief comment only on you quoted this St. Augustine. Indeed, Lacan falls back on this St. Augustine's quote, but the whole quote is Deus interior intimo meo et sumus et superior sumum meo. The God more interior than my most intimate and higher than my most highest. So it's both things.
Yeah,
it's
yeah.
more intimate and it's higher than the transcendence. It's not to say this is transcendence is not enough.
Yeah.
It's higher than transcendence. And just a third comment I have on the question of anti-philosophy, just sort of term that I was always kind of skeptical about. And the term actually stems from Tristan Tzara, who was the Dadaist, and who happened to live on Saint-Clotilde, just a floor above Lacan. So they had this kind of conversation, so there's a sort of ironical comment on Tristan Tzara, also this use of the term anti-philosophy.
The third reference on
Yeah.
anti-philosophy, and the last one is on Tristan Tzara.
It's just Tristan Tzara because he had this, they were neighbors. Mostly discussed this. And yes, this comes from a Dadaist, actually, background, the term anti-philosophy. And the reason I'm skeptical about this term is that it presupposes that we know what philosophy is. There's always a reductive definition of philosophy, which is at the bottom of saying, I'm anti-philosophy. What the hell is, which kind of philosophy? I don't think philosophy forms a totality. It's not a unified field. It's inconsistent multiplicity, to use the Baudusian term. And this is the only way that one can be true to philosophy, to be true to its inconsistent multiplicity. How the hell will you put all these various attempts of thought, very serious engagement of thought, on a sort of common denominator of this is philosophy and now we have to get out of it, or now we have to be anti or before it, as it were. I mean, there's no... Every lesson in philosophy, even in high school, starts by saying there's no definition of philosophy commonly accepted, because any definition of philosophy you give depends on the particular philosophy you're adopting. So this is where I think philosophy is not all. And I think if Lacan says woman doesn't exist, I think one can coin the same adage, philosophy with a capital P doesn't exist. This means that we have to be true to, these dangerousness.
But you know, precisely for that reason, I'm in favor of the term anti-philosophy, because it's actually not, it doesn't say me, Lacan, and coming and going to subvert philosophy once and for all. It's more pointing to an immanent antagonism that has been accompanying philosophy since the very beginnings. And you know, Lacan's preferred philosophical references are those that have mobilized in one way or another a certain conflictuality in thought. And others, like Aristotle, become just names for a very problematic tendency to closure, precisely to the standstill of thought, which abolishes the non-all within philosophy. And the same thought, what I find interesting is also that he exposes himself to a certain risk, because the term anti-philosophy comes from the anti-enlightenment and describes everyone who has been, it's a self-description for everyone who wanted to reinstall the absolute authority of theology and of religious dogmatism in metaphysical and also scientific matters. So it's anti-encyclopedia in the first place.
We have time for just one more question.
No, I have just one simple question for Singh. Are you not afraid to, let's say, to try to create a kind of ontology of extimacy? Because there is a whole socio-historical debate that in a certain way is not present. Because if we think about, for example, the Lacanian criticism on the ego psychology, the dimension of the reinforcement of American way of life, this way to integrate the subjectivity into the structures of individual and ego. And if you think that exactly in this time that Lacan is talking about extimacy, is exactly the moment of the, let's say, the most important moment of the state capitalism. Means this way to insist that there is no more social antagonisms in the society. We are in a kind of a demonstrate total world and a demonstrate possible of social struggles. And there is, and this demonstration is not just a social one, it's a psychic one too. And then there is also this kind of psychic integration of that. Well, if you think that exactly in this moment is the moment that Lacan insists in this this other type of structure of subjectivity that they extimate to every possibility of integration. Well, my question would be, well, why not insist in this social historical aspect and context to show in a certain way, let's say, the political force of the Lacanian concept?
Well, but you know, I mean, like any other ontology, what Lacan is attempting, if he has some ontological aspirations in his teaching, it's a political ontology. So I'm not saying that I want to ahistoricize the problems that he's addressing with extimity. I'm more interested in this prefix X as a speculative prefix that addresses a very interesting entanglement between a very clear historical anchoring of a problem and a certain you know, like longer durée of the issue. I had to think about that during Alenka's talk when you were saying that the problem is not historical so much, and the issue of history comes into the picture when capitalism starts to quantify this symbolic excess. But there is a longer history of the, let's say, struggle with the autonomy of the symbolic order and everything that it causes in the body and in intersubjective relations. So I guess this doesn't bring us to some ahistoricity, but to a broader framing of a historical problematic. That's why also my relation to existence as a second term that could be brought into the picture, because it leads back to materialism, to the emergence of philosophy as the encounter of something that exists but not fully, something that is in movement. So not being, but more like emergence and disappearance of being, some sort of Photon-Dasein. That's why the term ontology. But it doesn't, of course, it doesn't deny the fact that extimacy is also, in a very concrete context, linked to the problem of capitalist segregation. And it would be delirious to try to ontologize this on the contrary.
So just, it is fascinating, this comment, what you said. It is fascinating, this point that you pointed out, when you say that Extimacy it's not yet a monism. It's not a monism, it's not yet a pluralism. It's fascinating.
I mean, existence, not so much extimacy.
Existence. Okay.
Okay, thank you.